Hey guys, tonight we time travel back to an era where job applications didn't involve resumes or Zoom calls, but something far more medieval. You stand before a fortress carved into the misty hills, moss between its ancient stones, soot curling from the iron chimneys, and a deep judgmental silence filling the air. You're here for a job interview, though no one's explained what the job actually is. Your cloak is damp, your stomach's doing somersaults, and someone behind you is sharpening a halberd while making eye contact. This is not LinkedIn. This is the year 1296, give or take a plague cycle. And unless you've got noble blood, impeccable Latin, and a very good sword arm, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and local time. I'd love to see who's trying to sleep through medieval chaos with me tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the muddy path toward the castle gates, clutching a damp parchment with what you hope passes for a cover letter, though it's really just your name and an awkward drawing of your family crest, which may or may not be a confused-looking duck. A low mist slinks across the ground, curling around your boots as if trying to pull you back. Even nature's unsure of your choices. A pair of guards eye you from beneath chainmail coifs, leaning on long pikes. One's chewing something wet and brown, probably tobacco, possibly bark, and the other cradles a wooden bucket filled with suspiciously reddish water and a handful of twitching leeches. Name, the bark chewer grunts, not looking up. You give it. Intent? Job. I'm here for a position? A slow blink. Position, huh? He gestures to a nearby sign that reads, Help wanted, strong of limb, pure of heart, resistant to curses. You smile weakly, he doesn't. The second guard dunks his hand into the leech bucket and flicks one onto your boot. It climbs. You try not to scream. Interviews through the bailey, past the dung heap next to the stables. If you reach the gibbet, you've gone too far. You nod, step forward, and immediately gag. Because the dung heap is not a metaphor. The scent is comprehensive. It invades every pore of your being and tucks itself behind your eyelids for safekeeping. A goose hisses at you from beneath a cart, and you very nearly lose the job before it begins. Historians still argue whether castle gatekeepers were trained in intimidation or if it simply came naturally. Either way, you're convinced they could sense weakness through several layers of wool. The one thing they didn't do? Offer directions. Cartography was for monks and the suicidal. You wander through the outer courtyard, dodging chickens and the occasional suspicious puddle, until you finally arrive at a low stone doorway marked Candidates. A man with a beard that would make a wizard jealous stands beside it, holding a quill and a skull. You can't tell which one he prefers. Experience? He asks. I can read? He snorts. In what language? Mostly English, a little French. He sighs, writes something, and sticks a piece of waxed cloth to your shoulder that reads Apprentice, questionable. Inside, you join a nervous queue of others, some armored, some barefoot, one inexplicably dressed as a barrel. You try to make small talk, but it's hard to connect when everyone's either whispering prayers or visibly mouthing sword techniques. The walls are damp. A rat scuttles by holding something shiny. A monk coughs in Latin. Suddenly a bell rings, and a man in a robe that smells like incense and horse breath shouts, "Next!" Your name is called. The room stills. Even the rats seem to hold their breath. You enter a small antechamber with a single wooden chair, an iron sconce, and what appears to be an entire collection of taxidermied squirrels in tiny tunics. A bishop, at least you think he's a bishop, sits behind a stone table, flipping through a scroll the length of a fishing net. Ah, another aspirant. You sit awkwardly. He glances at your parchment, then at you. No papal recommendation, no land, no visible signs of divine favor. I made this duck, you offer, showing your crest. He peers at it. Interesting beak geometry. You brighten. Thank you. I wasn't complimenting. He unfurls another scroll. Before we proceed, do you consent to bleeding, potential trial by combat and temporary possession? When out of possession? He waves vaguely. Spiritual, possibly goat-related. You nod. What else can you do? This was actually standard procedure in some ecclesiastical interviews. Not the goats necessarily, but the blend of religious scrutiny and bodily hazard. One had to demonstrate not only skill, but also moral clarity, usually proven through feats like fasting, pilgrimages, or memorizing the entire book of Psalms while kneeling on gravel. You hear chanting through the wall. The bishop leans in. One final question. Do you have any mortal enemies? You blink. I mean, no. Pity. We like candidates with a nemesis. Builds character. He stamps your parchment with a slug-shaped seal and waves you out the side door. You're shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from the overwhelming realization that you're now in a place where blood oaths, leech therapy, and unexpected spiritual interventions are not only legal, they're part of the HR process. You take a breath, look around the shadowy hallway, and murmur to yourself, "This is fine. I'm fine. I'm so incredibly not fine." You follow the corridor's sticky stones until it widens into what looks like a waiting chamber, though it smells suspiciously like pickled cabbage and regret. Benches line the wall, some carved with ancient runes, others stained with things you'd rather not examine. A tapestry of Saint Cuthbert wrestling a bear hangs crookedly above a brazier that provides more smoke than heat. At least the rats are giving you space now. They've moved on to torment the man in the corner, muttering about bread taxes. A steward appears in the doorway, cloaked in stiff wool, and the kind of authority you only get from years of judging other people's elbows. He scans the room, his gaze landing on you like a cold ladle of soup down the back. Apprentice, questionable, he reads from your wax label. You'll be meeting with the genealogical examiner. Stand straight. You rise and your knee cracks so loudly that a nearby scribe flinches. The steward leads you down another hall, this one lined with portraits of angry-looking men holding scrolls, turnips, or both. You're ushered into a narrow chamber filled with scrolls, ink pots, and a single judgy greyhound asleep on a velvet pillow. Behind a desk, a woman wearing more rings than fingers peers at you through a monocle made of bone. Name, she says. It is not a question. You give it again. Family origin? You pause. From the eastern village of... She snorts. I meant, who was your great-grandfather's feudal overlord? And how many bushels of barley did your bloodline owe in tithe? I don't know. She scribbles furiously. Ignorant of heritage? Possibly tainted with cow thought. You blink. Cow thought? Some families have it. They chew when they're nervous and avoid stares. To your horror, you realize your jaw's moving. You stop chewing your sleeve. She rifles through a wooden drawer and pulls out a brittle parchment depicting some kind of tree. It's labeled with names, most of which sound like types of cheese or minor diseases. She jabs a spot. If you are descended from the Brattleham Spriggans of Clogworthy-on-Merk, we may have a position opening in mildew monitoring. You shrug helplessly. My mother kept chickens? Her expression doesn't change. Irrelevant. Was she permitted to whistle at funerals? There's a long pause. You say, probably not? She sighs. Then nobility is out. In the Middle Ages, pedigree wasn't just an advantage. It was your literal key to employment. Forget your GPA. What mattered was your lineage, your family's landholdings, and whether or not anyone in your ancestry had been publicly shamed by a bishop. Whole careers were built on uncle rumors and grandmother prayers. If your third cousin once translated a saint's finger into Latin, congratulations. You might qualify for a clerkship. You, however, are deeply unremarkable by these standards. The genealogist eyes your teeth. Open. You do. She inspects with what may or may not be a chicken feather. Front molars symmetrical. Moderate plague scarring on the lower gums. Better than average. You may be suitable for cart pulling or goat direction. Is that prestigious? She shrugs. Depends on the goat. She stamps your parchment again, this time with a faintly melted wax image of a shoe. You're uncertain whether this is an insult or an endorsement. Before you can ask, a young boy rushes in carrying a tray of preserved eels. He trips over your foot. The tray flies, and now you are wearing 3.5 eels, one of which is still twitching. The genealogist smiles faintly. Auspicious sign, the eel chooses the humble. You're about to protest, but she's already turned back to her scrolls, muttering something about eel omens and medieval virtue. You tiptoe out of the room, dripping, feeling like you've just been blessed and cursed simultaneously. Historians still argue whether medieval hiring rituals were deliberately cryptic to protect the class hierarchy, or simply a matter of deeply flawed record-keeping and eel-based divination. Some documents suggest that entire villages fabricated noble lineages with decorative initials and aggressive calligraphy. Others imply that the local priests just liked drawing antlers next to people's names to make them feel special. You're ushered into a drying room, where another steward hands you a linen rag and a hunk of stale bread. For nerves, he says, watching you eat it like a disappointed uncle. The wall here is covered in etchings, doodles of unicorns, scribbled prayers, and a detailed drawing of a man fighting a chicken with a spoon. You sit beside a nervous candidate who whispers, "Did they ask about the goats yet?" "Not yet." He swallows hard. "They will." You're not sure if that's a threat or a promise. Eventually, your name echoes again, carried by a crier who looks like he hasn't blinked since the last solar eclipse. Apprentice, questionable, requested by Steward Hobb. You are summoned to the dressing chamber. You rise again, limbs still damp from eel juice and judgment. The corridor this time is dimmer, lit by tallow candles stuck in skulls. Possibly decorative, possibly not. You pass by a woman sewing what appears to be chainmail for a duck. Finally, the dressing chamber. Inside, an elderly tailor squints at you. "You wore that here?" You glance down. "Yes?" He sighs. "We shall pray for your dignity." He begins draping you in fabrics, muttering to himself. Interview robe must reflect the station desired. Burlap for brewers, velvet for scribes. You shall wear goat wool and ashes. That feels symbolic. He fluffs a bit of hay into your hood, fashionable in East Saxony, or possibly a punishment. Hard to recall. The end result is something between a scarecrow and a failed tapestry. You are itchy, flammable, and radiating confusion. But you're ready. Ready in the way a peasant is ready to meet a dragon, bravely, foolishly, and with deeply inappropriate footwear. You're led to the next chamber, parchment in hand, wax stamps flaking off like dandruff of the damned. Your job hopes hang by a thread, and that thread is made of eel slime and genealogical disappointment. Somewhere behind you, a duck in a helmet honks, and you wonder, maybe goat direction isn't so bad after all. You step carefully through the next doorway, mindful not to snag your goat wool tunic on the nail-studded lintel, and find yourself in a smoky chamber that smells like beeswax, old books, and someone's misplaced soup. At a long oak table sits a cluster of scribes, hunched like gargoyles over parchment, and at the far end, illuminated by a shaft of dusty light, a bald man with a furrowed brow and a rosary the size of a belt unrolls an absurdly long scroll. You're about to ask if this is still the job interview, but before you can speak, he raises a hand and booms, "This interview shall be conducted in Latin." You blink. Parvus? One of the scribes scribbles that down. The bald man, probably a monk, possibly a judge, or quite feasibly both, tilts his head. "Evos nostis theologiam?" You stare. He repeats it slower as though that will help. "Do you know theology?" You clear your throat. "I once fell asleep in a sermon." A second scribe adds this to a new column, possibly titled Crimes Against Reverence. What follows is less an interview and more an academic ambush. You're asked your thoughts on St. Augustine's interpretation of original sin, whether the Fifth Crusade justified the excommunication of laundry doers, and, bizarrely, how many angels can fit on a barley loaf. "I thought it was a pin," you whisper. Three scribes gasp in horror. There is a long silence. You attempt to salvage things by mentioning that your uncle once fasted for Lent by giving up sarcasm. The head monk writes something in red ink. Red is never a good sign. Historians still argue whether Latin fluency was expected of all job applicants or just a convenient way for monks to feel superior. In some regions, even stable hands were expected to know basic ecclesiastical terms, though there's significant scholarly pushback suggesting most of them just nodded and said amen to everything. Eventually, they switched to Middle English. It doesn't help. "List thy heresies, if any," one monk says kindly. You shake your head quickly. None at all. Not even the use of garlic on feast days? Okay, that's a heresy." He scribbles something again. "Tell us then, what is the weight of a blessed turnip?" What? A trick question," the monk smiles. "There is no such thing as a blessed turnip. Everyone chuckles except you. This is what passes for humor among medieval scholars. You laugh too, late and weirdly loud." The monk sighs. "Let us move on to practical matters." He gestures to an acolyte, who brings out what appears to be a small, taxidermied boar wearing a bishop's mitre. "Identify the saint represented." You stare. Is that Saint Hubert?" Another gasp. "Saint Hubert is associated with deer, not boars. I mean, maybe it's symbolic. Symbolism is heretical unless sanctioned." They debate quietly for a moment about whether the boar's mitre was too papal. You take the opportunity to inch backward toward the exit, but a large wooden crucifix tips slightly in your direction, like a spiritual reminder to stay put. To be fair, medieval interviews often included bizarre theological tests, especially for clerical jobs, scribeships, or court positions. Knowing your saints was vital, but interpretations varied wildly by region. One record even mentions a candidate who was disqualified for misidentifying Saint Scholastica as the one with the goats and the bees. She had neither. Eventually, one monk with kind eyes, at least relatively speaking, leans forward and asks gently, "Do you know your plague symptoms?" This finally you do. Fever, chills, boils, coughing blood, general unease. The scribe nods. "And do you currently have any of those?" Not, not actively. The room collectively breathes out. In medieval times, being actively alive was not always enough. Your capacity to remain alive was also evaluated, especially if the job required close quarters, like transcribing scrolls or cleaning relics. The monk continues, "You appear moderately teachable." "Oh no, thank you." But first, a test of humility. He claps, a door opens, a chicken runs in. You are handed a tiny shovel. "Prove your worth," the monk says. "Cleanse the coop of evil." You are still in your itchy goat wool robe, mind you. You follow the chicken back into a side room. This one even darker, with straw carpeting, feathers floating like snow, and an odorous humidity that suggests something has been fermenting in here for a while. You clean, you scoop, you learn humility. 20 minutes later, you reemerge covered in down and questions about your life choices. One monk hands you a damp cloth. Another offers you a single date as reward. The date is partly squashed and seems vaguely judgmental. You eat it anyway. As you exit the chamber, someone hands you a scroll titled Doctrina Humilitatis, a proved candidate edition. Your name is scrawled across the top in an optimistic shade of brown. You've passed something. You don't know what, but you're still in the running, and for now that's enough. You walk down the corridor passing a tapestry that seems to depict a man being lectured by a cabbage. You feel seen. Around the corner, a tall man in armor blocks your path. "Next phase," he grunts. You stare up at him. "What's the next phase?" He smiles. "Just a little." "Weapons check." You swallow. "Hard." You're led through another passage, this one with scorched beams and what might be claw marks on the walls. The smell of oil, iron, and mild panic hangs in the air. Your feet echo on the flagstones, and your goat wool robe is now caked with feathers, date residue, and existential dread. You're still digesting the theological inquisition when the armored man opens a door with his elbow and shoves you gently, if firmly, into what appears to be a practice arena. There's hay on the ground. A pig's bladder hangs from a rope, and against one wall a stack of weapons that appear to be either training tools or extremely misunderstood kitchen implements. This isn't a job interview. This is medieval HR's idea of a skills test. A knight, full plate, polished greaves, helmet under his arm, strolls toward you. He has the mustache of a man who's fought both dragons and intestinal parasites and survived both. "Right," he says, clapping his hands. "You'll be proving your readiness for employment by engaging in a mock duel." You blink. "Mock?" He grins. "Mostly." He gestures to the weapon rack. "Choose your instrument. We've got maces, cudgels, blunted swords, broom handles, that suspicious fork, and, for the daring, a goose on a stick." You stare at the last item. It is, in fact, a taxidermied goose nailed to a staff. You grab the broom handle. It feels slightly less likely to be possessed. Across the arena, your opponent is selected. A young woman in chainmail with an eye twitch and arms that suggest she churns butter recreationally. She waves politely. You wave back, uncertain whether this is sportsmanship or a curse. Begin, the knight shouts. She charges. Your life flashes before your eyes, which is awkward because most of it involves root vegetables in this very moment. You raise the broom handle just in time to block a downward swing, which rattles your wrists and causes a feather to dislodge from your hood in protest. You stumble back. She circles, grinning. Historically, martial ability wasn't just respected, it was required. Even for seemingly gentle roles like page, footman, or minor steward, you had to prove you could defend the castle if needed. The medieval job market was, quite literally, cutthroat, and mock duels were very real. Nobles had entire training routines involving sparring, mounted combat, and the ever-popular hit your enemy with a sack of flour until someone yields. You swing your broom handle. She parries easily and bops you on the shoulder. Ow. That's the spirit, she grins. The knight claps. Continue. You try a feint duck and somehow trip over your own robe. You land in hay and your dignity takes 5 points of psychic damage. But you bounce up, sort of, and jab forward. The broom glances off her vambrace, and she laughs. It's unclear who's winning. Eventually, the knight calls time. Stop! That was spirited. You wheeze. She salutes and leaves, still humming. You, limping slightly, are handed a water skin filled with something that tastes like apples and ashes. For fortitude, the knight says. Thank you, you whisper, then cough. He places a hand on your shoulder. You've got potential. Have you considered stable sweeping? Or goose herding? We're always short on goose herders. Do I need more dueling experience for that? Only if the geese are armed. You laugh weakly. One scribe, who's been taking notes in the corner the entire time, steps forward and quietly says, Next test, tactical intelligence. Oh no, you murmur. You're led into a small room with a large board covered in tiny wooden tokens. Castles, rivers, sheep, and one very angry-looking bishop figure. A man with ink-stained fingers gestures to the setup. This is the Duchy of Meldford. You are its steward. Bandits approach from the north. Your harvest is late. Your lord demands a feast. You have 4 pigs, 2 guards, and a leaky roof. What do you do? You pause. Is this a trick question? No, it's Thursday. You take a deep breath. Okay, send the pigs to distract the bandits? He nods slowly. Then I station 1 guard on the roof and the other in the cellar, where the meat is. The man grunts. And I serve barley stew at the feast instead of roast. Explain the pigs are a religious offering. He stares. A slow smile creeps across his face. Clever, he says. Foolish but clever. Historians still argue whether tactical games like this were common or just a post hoc justification for chess. What's clear is that strategic thinking mattered, especially in administrative roles. A poor decision could lead to famine, rebellion, or someone accidentally marrying the wrong cousin. The man adjusts the bishop piece. You pass, barely. Don't forget the roof. Right. Patch it with turnip leaves? He nods solemnly. Time-honored method. With that, he stamps your parchment again, this time with a small goat-shaped seal. You're beginning to collect quite the wax zoo. You're let out the side door into yet another hall. You smell sweat, charcoal, and the faintest whiff of despair. The floor is now straw-covered again. The walls adorned with portraits of men looking like they haven't slept since the Crusades. You find a bench and sit heavily. A boy next to you whispers, Did you fight the butter woman too? You nod. She hit me in the spleen. Me too. Wasn't that invigorating? Not the word I'd choose. You exchange quiet groans of solidarity. A bell tolls somewhere. Your name is called once more. Apprentice, questionable. Ready for the next phase, linguistic verification and theological dialect calibration. You squint. Is that Latin again? No, worse. Worse? Dialect from the Northern Moors, 12th century revision. You stare. The boy leans toward you. Don't panic, just say loam a lot and look mildly offended. Noted. You're escorted into a candlelit chamber by a friar who looks like he hasn't laughed since the Fourth Lateran Council. He gestures for you to sit on a creaky stool beside a roaring fire that smells oddly like cabbage and old sermons. Across from you stands a stern-faced woman wearing half a dozen brooches and holding a book titled Concerning the Spiritual Grammar of Northumbrian Speech. She doesn't sit. She hovers. Speak your full name, she says without preamble. You oblige, trying to sound both pious and confident, which is difficult when your mouth still tastes faintly of eel and panic. She sniffs. Acceptable vowel formation. Now translate this. She clears her throat and, with solemn precision, utters, Wart thou fashed wi' yon skullduggery o' ploughfellow's kin? You blink. I'm sorry, was that words? She stares at you like you've insulted her turnip collection. That was perfectly comprehensible to any decent soul from East Mercia. You nod, stalling. Would you mind repeating it? She does, slower, louder, not clear. You hazard a guess. Am I annoyed at someone's cousin in a barn? She tilts her head, grudgingly impressed. Close. The correct translation is, were you vexed by the dishonorable dealings of your fellow farmhand's family? Right, you nod. Naturally. She flips a page. Now conjugate the verb to supplicate in the imperative mood. Northumbrian inflection, past perfect subjunctive. You give her a look usually reserved for incoming bee swarms. In medieval interviews, linguistic testing wasn't merely to ensure fluency. It was about regional loyalty, religious orthodoxy, and making sure you wouldn't accidentally insult someone's grandmother while reciting the Psalms. Dialect varied wildly, and pronunciation could mark you as an outsider, or worse, a secret French sympathizer. You try something. Supplicateth, yeah, had oughtn't plowed? The woman gasps slightly. A monk in the corner coughs meaningfully. That was unintentionally poetic, she murmurs. You're not sure if that's a pass or an omen. She moves on. Describe the Holy Trinity using only metaphors involving root vegetables. You blink. Pardon? It is a common test. You inhale. Okay. The Father is the seed potato. He begins it all. She leans in. The Son is the growing shoot. Visible, tangible, sustaining. A scribe begins scribbling. And the Holy Spirit is the soil itself, unseen, yet vital. There is a stunned silence. Then the woman quietly says, I must go speak with the bishop. She exits. You're left alone with a different monk who offers you a soft cloth and a turnip. For contemplation, he explains, you hold it, unsure whether to pray, bite it, or name it Gregory. The monk sits beside you. Many applicants fail at this stage. You're doing well. You smile weakly. But now, he continues, comes the trial of symbols. Sorry? You'll be shown a series of holy and noble symbols. You must not only identify them, but interpret their spiritual and feudal relevance. He gestures to a small curtain, which is pulled aside to reveal a table of carved wooden figures. You see a lamb with 2 heads, a flagon with wings, a lion wearing spectacles, and a spoon. The monk points. First, the lamb, you say, symbolizes, you squint. Duality, the dual nature of Christ? He nods slowly. And? Mild confusion. He chuckles. You'll go far. You identify the flagon as the cup of mercy, the lion as St. Ludwin's beast of discernment, a total guess, and the spoon as a relic used to anoint the foreheads of repentant bakers. He nods. Very good, except that the spoon is decorative, from my lunch. Oh, he pockets it. Historians still argue whether symbolic interpretation was part of job evaluations or just a way to weed out heretics and creative thinkers. Some claim the church used such tests to affirm orthodoxy. Others think it was more about entertainment and mild theological hazing. A bell rings. The monk pats your shoulder. You are now cleared for the devotional vow segment. Your brain quietly collapses in a corner, but you rise. A new friar leads you through a cloister to a small courtyard, where an old priest waits beside a brazier, some incense, and what appears to be a taxidermied crow. He nods solemnly. Before you may serve in any household, ecclesiastical or noble, you must take the vow of devotion. You straighten. He raises a candle. Repeat after me. I hereby forsake vanity, idleness, and excessive cheese. You do. I vow to serve with clarity, humility, and clean boots. You repeat it, glancing at your not-so-clean boots. I promise not to spill ink upon sacred texts, nor to doodle upon margins, nor to whistle hymns in the privy. You swear solemnly. And I acknowledge that failure in these things may result in public flogging or minor sainthood, depending on audience. You mutter something between compliance and a prayer. He nods and sprinkles you with rosemary water. The crow stares into your soul. You may proceed. You exit into yet another hallway, this one dimmer, more echoing. A guard with a lazy eye and a lute motions you onward. Tea break, he says. Oh, finally. You sit in a corner nook and are handed a cup of what might be tea or soup or melted beeswax. There's also a slice of bread with a single plum embedded like treasure in a desert. You sip cautiously. It's bitter, comforting. Then you realize the man sitting beside you is wearing a leather apron and holding a set of tongs. Hi, he says, I'm the torturer. You nod slowly. Nice to meet you. He offers you a dried fig. Don't worry, I'm off duty. Just like to see who's new. Helps me gauge future candidates. You smile tightly. Do you interview people too? He grins. Sometimes, usually just test their honesty. You chuckle nervously. I like your duck crest, he adds. Says you're not trying too hard. Thank you. You'll be fine, he says, unless you whistle hymns. You very much never will. As tea break ends, you rise. He waves his tongs. Good luck. You're really starting to miss modern HR. You leave the tea nook with your dignity barely intact and a fig pit in your pocket, possibly for luck, possibly because you weren't sure where else to put it. The corridor beyond curves slightly and grows colder, lit only by irregular torches that sputter like they're unsure of their purpose. Ahead, two doors stand side by side. One bears the carving of an open book. The other is marked with a crude drawing of a bee and what might be a person screaming. A friar steps into view. Ah, apprentice. Questionable. This way, please. He gestures toward the door with the bee. Wait, you say. I thought I was going to be asked about bookkeeping. You are, he replies with a gentle smile. This is the beekeeping annex. You're shoved forward before you can explain that you've never kept a bee and probably never will. The door creaks open, and you're immediately hit with the scent of honey, sweat, and something vaguely herbal, like lavender with boundary issues. Inside, a hooded figure leans over a wooden table, surrounded by tiny scrolls and buzzing hives. She doesn't look up. You are the one who asked for clerical work? Yes. She nods slowly. Then let us test your calm, your patience, and your ability to remain still when surrounded by flying insects with unpredictable loyalties. You open your mouth, but a small bee lands on your lip, so you close it again. She continues. You will now copy this inventory list of sacred beeswax candles. Any mistakes, and the bees will know. You glance down at the parchment. The script is so cramped it looks like it was written by an ant having a breakdown. Your job is to transcribe it using a quill that smells faintly of goat and despair. You begin writing. The bees circle. One lands on your thumb. Another crawls across your neck with casual menace. You manage 5 lines before you sneeze, and several bees launch into defensive spirals, which causes the hooded figure to hiss. Silence! The queen is watching. You freeze. Historians still argue whether this particular test was a legitimate clerical assessment or an elaborate prank invented by monks with too much wax and too few hobbies. What is certain is that medieval scribes were trained under brutal conditions. Cramped rooms, cold fingers, ink made from crushed oak galls, and zero ergonomic chairs. You eventually finish the list, hands trembling. The woman takes it, inspects the lettering, then places a single honeycomb in your palm. Acceptable, she murmurs, but don't whistle near them. You nod with such vigor that a bee falls off your hair. You exit the room trailing sugar and terror, and find yourself in a cloister garden where a kindly-looking man offers you a bowl of rose water to wash your hands. Now then, he says, we'll need to verify your linguistic intentions. Sorry, what? Dialectal purity. You see, some applicants fake their origin stories to gain placement in higher houses. We can't have a low marcher claiming to be from Lancaster. That's how revolts begin. Oh, he pulls out a series of small illustrated cards. Each one features a word written in elaborate script and a drawing of something. One appears to be a hedgehog dancing with a bishop. You don't ask. He holds up the first card. This is the word muckflet. Define it. You blink. A type of feather? He frowns. Incorrect. It's the act of shoveling dung while reciting a psalm. Next card. Snorkel bund. A type of... Incorrect again. That's a pastry. This goes on. You get 3 correct, 1 by accident. He seems satisfied anyway. Linguistically ambiguous. We can work with that. He stamps your parchment with what looks like a sleepy snail. You're then shuffled toward a narrow stairwell that smells like onions and nervous ambition. A steward with boots up to his knees reads aloud from your scroll as you descend. Past theology with poetic heresy, mild success in combat, adequate symbol interpretation, tolerated bees, linguistic ambiguity confirmed. Now, yes, the exorcism round. You trip on the last step. Sorry, the what now? He shrugs. It's standard. Just a light exorcism to rule out demonic interference in your motivations. Is that a common concern? You'd be surprised. One lad last week tried to apply for 3 roles at once. Turned out to be a minor imp. Had to be brined. You're led into a side chapel lit entirely by black candles. At the far end, a friar with suspiciously glowing eyes holds a censer and mutters in a language that may be Latin, may be gibberish, or may be a very specific insult involving toads. He gestures for you to kneel. You do. He circles you, swinging the censer. You start to feel lightheaded, which might be the incense or the sudden doubt that you exist at all. He presses 2 fingers to your forehead. Name thy darkest desire. You freeze. Warmth? Gainful employment? Fewer bees? He frowns. No lust, no wrath, no dreams of goat theft? Uh, like cheese. He seems to accept that. Very well. He sprinkles something that might be blessed water or vinegar over your head, chants for a while, and then sighs. You appear to be free of infernal occupation. Thank you? Though, he adds, you may want to avoid mirrors during moonlight, just in case. You are given a small medallion, a pewter lamb chewing on a skull, and told to keep it in your left sock for at least 6 weeks. You have no idea why. The steward leads you back to the main hall. Congratulations, you've survived the spiritual phase. How many more are there? Unclear, he admits. Depends how many rooms the castle has today. That doesn't feel encouraging. You're shown to a chamber filled with robed scribes eating quietly from bowls of something gray. The steward nods toward them. Sit, rest, you've done well. Next we'll test your loyalty through dinner. Dinner? Yes, just eat carefully. You sit, heart pounding. Somewhere a goose honks ominously, and you begin to suspect this meal will not be restful. You sit at a long wooden table flanked by men and women in varying states of exhaustion, enlightenment, or both. The benches are worn smooth by centuries of anxious applicants, and the air is thick with steam, stew, and scrutiny. Directly across from you is a man with one eyebrow and a fork that looks like it's seen battle. To your left is a woman muttering grace, except the words keep shifting between Latin and something that sounds like interpretive grumbling. Eat, someone whispers near your ear. You're unsure who it was, but you're also too hungry to argue. Before you is a clay bowl filled with something viscous and grayish-brown. There are floating chunks, some root-like, some suspiciously spheroid. You poke it with your spoon. It fights back. The bread, meanwhile, is exactly 3 days past chewy and 2 hours shy of fossil. Ex-steward clears his throat from the front of the room. Tonight's meal is provided by the kitchen of Blessed Marjorie of Turnipton, who once fed an entire monastery using only prayer and a single disgruntled carrot. You will consume what is placed before you. This is a test. You glance at your bowl again. The one-eyebrow man raises his fork. The pudding will reveal your character, he whispers ominously. You try a spoonful. It tastes like guilt, lard, and possibly repentance. You smile, nod, swallow. Others are not so lucky. 2 applicants excuse themselves to be cleansed. One simply faints into their stew, which goes unnoticed. Halfway through, someone uncovers a tiny metal token in their pudding, a small disc stamped with a goat and a feather. Gasps ripple through the room. The steward strides over, examines the token, and says, "This candidate shall now undergo the loyalty disputation. All others continue chewing." You mercifully find nothing in your pudding but a small pebble. You choose to see that as divine mercy. Historians still argue whether such guess pudding tests were truly common or just a folkloric exaggeration passed down by traumatized monks. Some records suggest noble houses had complex mealtime rituals to test honesty, restraint, and gastrointestinal resilience. Others think it was just an excuse to serve whatever the cook tripped over that morning. You're offered a refill. You decline. Dessert, if it can be called that, is a boiled pear garnished with a single bay leaf and 1 accusatory raisin. It tastes better than it looks, which is not a high bar. After the plates are cleared, some with tongs, others with quiet exorcisms, you're instructed to rise for the feast oath. Everyone stands. A friar enters wearing a ceremonial apron and holding a large ladle as a scepter. "Repeat after me," he intones. I pledge upon this spoon and soup to uphold the house's honor. You mumble it back. To stir no broth in secrecy. You repeat. To never poison, overseason, or underbless. That one's harder, but you manage. The friar smacks the ladle against the table. Let it be known that this candidate did not flee the meal. That alone is worth a stamp. A scribe dutifully adds another symbol to your parchment. A steaming bowl with wings. You decide not to ask what it means. The loyalty test, it seems, is passed. Or survived. You're allowed to rest in the side chamber. A room filled with reed mats, a single harp playing itself in the corner, and walls painted with gentle murals of saints doing aggressively mundane tasks. One is threshing wheat, one is tying sandals, one is giving the side eye to a suspicious mushroom. A steward enters, this time holding a long scroll. You've reached phase 8, he announces, the trial of endurance. You groan softly. You will now complete a task designed to assess initiative, resourcefulness, and resistance to drowning. Ina, pardon? You'll see. You're marched out into the dusk, where the castle courtyard has transformed. Torches flicker, shadows stretch, and at the far end, a large wooden platform looms over a murky moat. A crowd has gathered, some cheer, some pray. You are handed a rope and a wooden bucket. Your task, the steward says, is to retrieve the Lord's missing signet ring from the water. It's in the moat? Yes. Is it guarded? He doesn't answer, just gestures to the water. You take a deep breath and approach the edge. The moat smells like fish, moss, and what your ancestors would call a bad idea. You spot a glint beneath the surface, maybe 10 feet out. You wade in. It's cold. Immediate. It grips you like the hands of 1,000 disapproving ancestors. The water is waist deep, with something, possibly weeds, possibly eels, brushing against your legs. You fight the urge to scream unclean and keep moving. A goose watches from the bank. You remember the rumor? There's a splash behind you. You freeze. A turtle surfaces, blinks, moves on, just checking apparently. You reach the glint and fish out what turns out to be a spoon. Back to square one. You dive again. This time your foot hits something metallic. You grab, it's heavy, ring-shaped. You surface triumphant. The goose honks disapprovingly. The crowd claps. Someone throws you a towel that doubles as a sermon transcript. You present the ring to the steward. He examines it. This is not the Lord's ring. You blink. It is, however, his wife's. That's harder to find. Bonus points. He stamps your parchment with a symbol of 2 interlocking spoons. You are apparently doing well. Historians still argue whether this kind of physical ordeal was a real part of job testing or just localized insanity specific to Castle Melford-on-Hay. But records do describe feats of devotion involving rivers, lost objects, or symbolic fish. One candidate reportedly caught an eel with his teeth and was made a bishop. Possibly apocryphal, you return to the castle dripping, exhausted, slightly fishier than you'd prefer. The steward takes your elbow gently. You'll want to change. The next phase involves nobility. You raise an eyebrow. Meeting them? No, he says gravely, avoiding insulting them. That sounds harder. You're handed a robe only slightly less damp than your current one and shown to a small room lined with etiquette manuals. They have titles like Don't Gaze at the Duchess, Kneel, Don't Crawl, and Never Comment on the Earl's Beard. You try to read, but the words blur, your eyes ache, and the door creaks open again. You're up, says a voice. You rise and walk toward what may be the most dangerous phase yet, polite conversation. with people who can execute you if you sneeze incorrectly. The hallway to the reception chamber is unnervingly clean. The floors are swept. The torches glow just the right amount. There's a bowl of lavender near the door, which feels like a trap. Everything about this part of the castle screams, behave or else. A page boy hands you a handkerchief scented with something that smells faintly of pine, chalk, and consequence. You'll be meeting the minor lord, the steward whispers. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not ask questions. Do not make eye contact longer than 2 Mississippis. What's a Mississippi? Exactly. The chamber you enter is long and low-ceilinged, with faded banners along the walls and a massive fireplace crackling at the far end. A nobleman sits in a chair so large it may have once been a siege engine. He's wrapped in furs, wearing rings on every finger, and staring at you like he's trying to decide whether you're edible. You bow too low. You almost faceplant. He snorts. Rise, he says, voice like gravel being poured into a helmet. You stand unsure what your hands should be doing. You settle on politely limp. So, he says, you seek employment. You nod carefully. In what capacity? You open your mouth, but he waves a hand. Doesn't matter. Most apprentices start in latrine inspection. You've heard of the noble house of Mulchgrave? You haven't. He doesn't wait. Old family, pillars of the region, invented carrot-based taxation. You blink. He leans forward. Do you know what makes a good servant? You guess. Loyalty? He grunts. No, discretion, especially when it comes to things like accounting errors or disappearing pigs. You nod. And can you be discreet? You nod again. And you will never, under any circumstances, inquire about my third son's facial situation? You nod so hard your neck cracks. He leans back, satisfied. Historians still argue whether nobles truly expected silence from their staff, or if it was simply a pretext for arbitrary punishment. Some sources suggest entire courtrooms functioned on unwritten rules like don't mention the mole, don't step on the tiles with birds, and never laugh at the jester's limp, even if he starts it. The noble gestures to his steward, who approaches with a tray. It holds a small cake, a live frog, and what appears to be a folded piece of parchment. You stare. The steward whispers, choose one. Why? Loyalty test. You look at the cake. Too obvious. The frog, definitely a trap. You pick the parchment. The noble grins. Interesting. You unfold it. It says, well chosen. The frog was poisoned. The cake was a decoy. You're not an idiot. Relief washes over you like warm gravy. The Lord rises, an event so significant that 2 servants appear just to assist with his cloak. You may be suitable, he says. But there's one more trial. You resist the urge to scream. You'll need to attend the court banquet tonight. Represent the apprentices. If you don't offend anyone, fall asleep, or get eaten by the boar, we'll see about employment. You nod. Go now, prepare. And for heaven's sake, change your shoes. You glance down. You are, in fact, still wearing the mismatched, damp footwear from the moat ordeal. One of them may be a turnip. You're dismissed with a flick of his pinky. Back in the hall, a nervous steward greets you with a deep sigh. Banquet prep begins now. There's not much time. And you're you're whisked into a small dressing room where 3 people descend upon you like well-meaning locusts. You're stripped, scrubbed with what smells like vinegar and lavender, and redressed in a tunic that scratches exactly where it shouldn't. Smile practice, one of them says. You attempt a smile. It's alarming. They try again. Less teeth. You attempt a closed-mouth grin that reads, "I have not hidden your goat, my lord." Ah, see. Better. Another attendant arrives bearing a tray of etiquette scrolls and a live squirrel wearing a tiny tabard. No one explains the squirrel. You pretend it isn't there. You review key banquet protocols. Don't drink before the Lord does. Don't eat the decorative meat. If someone drops their goblet, pretend not to see it. Never speak ill of a bishop, especially if he's within earshot, disguised as a wine steward. If the dancing bear escapes, climb something soft. A bell rings. You're ushered into the feast hall. It is enormous, loud, lit with chandeliers made of antlers and beeswax. Long tables stretch the length of the hall, covered in trenchers, goblets, and bowls of food that range from delicious to probably still alive. You're seated at the apprentice table near the minstrels. They're currently tuning their lutes using screams of varying pitch. A roasted boar is carried in, decorated with apples, rosemary, and what looks like someone's misplaced monocle. It snorts. You pretend not to notice. The noble arrives, everyone stands. You stand, then sit, then stand again because you got the timing wrong. A jester cartwheels into the room and somersaults directly into a custard dish. The crowd applauds. You do too, but you knock over your water goblet. It spills silently under the table. You freeze. Did anyone see? A steward approaches with a cloth and a raised eyebrow. You whisper, "I've cleansed my corner for the saints." He stares, then smiles. Very good. Dinner begins. You eat cautiously, a slice of venison, some bread, a thing that might be a pickled apple or a small experiment in fermentation. You're doing fine, until the bishop stands. He raises a goblet and begins to toast something, possibly Saint Benedict, possibly a goat named Benedict, and ends by flinging a goose feather into the air. It lands in your stew. Everyone turns. The noble leans forward. Well, you swallow. Pick up the feather, kiss it lightly. For Saint Benedict, you say, and his enduring poultry. There is a long pause. Then the noble chuckles. Others join in. The feast resumes. You breathe. Historians still argue whether banquet protocol was actually this intense or whether accounts were exaggerated by exhausted scribes seeking sympathy. Either way, it's clear. One wrong word, one ill-timed slurp, and your career could end in shame or soup. You survived the banquet. Mostly dry, mostly fed, mostly upright. You're escorted back to the side chamber, where a single wax candle flickers beside your now battered parchment. The steward smiles. You've done the impossible. You blink. I got the job. Not yet, he says. One final trial. Your heart sinks. He leans in. The references round. You stare. You'll need 3, and they must be clergy. You sit on the edge of a lumpy bench in the chapel vestibule, parchment clutched in your trembling hands. Outside, the midnight bell tolls. Once, twice, you've lost count. Time is no longer your concern. Your concern is this. You need 3 clerical references, and the only friars who know your name are the ones who watched you botch Latin, flinch at bees, and kiss a stew feather in front of 50 nobles. The steward hands you a small slate board and a stub of chalk. Clerics only, he repeats. No barbers, no neighbors, and no family unless they've taken at least one vow. You blink. A vow of silence counts? He shrugs. Only if they can still write. Your first idea is the monk who oversaw your theological examination. The one with the rosary and the boar effigy. You remember his name, Brother Godfrey, and you remember the way he scribbled poetic heresy next to your commentary on root vegetables and the Trinity. You approach his study. He's still there, hunched over a codex and muttering to himself. You knock. He doesn't look up. You try again. Finally, he grunts. If you are here to apologize for confusing St. Peter with St. Pliny, I accept. I'm actually here for a reference. That gets his attention. He eyes you. Why? You take a deep breath. Because I endured the pudding, because I retrieved a ring from a moat, because I kissed a feather and it felt correct, and because, despite the bees, I'm still here. He narrows his eyes. You also claimed the Holy Spirit is like loam. It was metaphorical. I know, he says. That's why I liked it. He pulls a quill from behind his ear and scrawls something on a strip of parchment. Take this. I've left your character deliberately vague. That's usually best. You thank him, bow awkwardly, and make your way back into the hall. One down. Your next idea is Sister Agatha, the beekeeper scribe who smelled faintly of smoke and honey. You hesitate. She didn't seem the warm and fuzzy type, but she did say you were acceptable, and in medieval terms, that's practically glowing praise. You return to the beekeeping annex. It's darker now. The bees are asleep, or possibly plotting. You find her stacking wax candles with the precision of someone who knows 5 kinds of combat. Back again, she asks. You nod. I need your endorsement. She tilts her head. You didn't shriek. You didn't swat. You wrote legibly. You left with your dignity mostly intact. I also might still have a bee in my hood. That's between you and St. Ambrose. She considers. Then she hands you a sliver of beeswax pressed with a sigil. 2 crossed quills atop a honeycomb. Take it, she says. But if you spill ink near my hives, I'll know. You nod. You won't, ever. 2 down. The third is where it gets tricky. You think hard. Who else counts? The friar who lightly exorcised you might. But he did suggest avoiding mirrors. That feels like a bad start. Then it hits you, the torturer. He's technically not clergy, but he did say he used to sing in a monastery choir. That might count. You find him where you left him, sitting outside the tea nook, polishing his tongs and humming something that might be Ave Maria or row, row, row your boat. He looks up. You survived the feast? Barely. Did the feather thing? Of course. He nods. Sit. You do. You want a reference from me? Yes. He considers. I don't usually give those unless someone's lost a finger. Builds character. You hold up your hand. Fully intact but thoroughly humbled. He chuckles. You're strange, he says. I like that. And you never flinched when I mentioned rack maintenance. You weren't sure how to respond then. You still aren't. He pulls a small medallion from his belt pouch. A circle of bronze with a tiny spoon etched into the surface. Take it, he says. I'm not officially clergy, but I did bless a chicken once. You don't ask. You pocket the medallion, thank him, and sprint. Not literally, you're still damp in one shoe. Back to the steward's office. He sits in a tall chair that seems to be 80% upholstery, 10% splinters, and 10% threat. 3 references, he asks. You present the vague scroll, the beeswax sigil, and the spoon medallion like holy relics. He examines them, grunts approvingly, and jots a note on your parchment. Your wax stamps now resemble a medieval zoo. A duck, a goat, a snail, 2 spoons, a candle, and a winged bowl. You don't know what they mean, you just know they're heavy with meaning. Next, the steward says, we move on to the compensation briefing. You perk up. Oh, finally, something straightforward. He smiles gently. No. You're ushered into a chamber where a man dressed entirely in mustard yellow robes sits beside a wooden scale. On one side, a rock. On the other, a turnip, a coin, and a feather. He gestures. This is your wage structure. You wait for elaboration, there is none. You clear your throat. What am I looking at? He speaks slowly. 2 stones worth of barley per week. 3 meals per day, of which one will be warm. A woolen blanket in winter. Access to 3 spoons and 1 ceremonial ladle. Do I get money? He frowns. You'll get usefulness and sometimes cheese. Oh, plus, he adds, you'll be allowed to sleep near the hearth. On feast days in the actual hearth. You blink. Won't that burn? He shrugs. Warmth comes at a price. Historians still argue whether medieval compensation packages were intended to inspire loyalty or merely to prevent complete insurrection. Wages varied by region, season, and how many rats had recently bitten the bailiff. But for many, payment was about survival, food, shelter, and occasionally salt. You're handed a small pouch containing a clove of garlic, 2 copper pennies, and a tiny wooden spoon. It jingles less than you hoped. Take care of the spoon, the steward says. It's symbolic. You want to ask of what, but you're too tired. Report to the Hall of Declarations, he adds. You've nearly made it. Nearly? He just smiles. You trudge down the corridor, weighed down by strange blessings and ambiguous wages. A cat with one eye watches you from a rafter. You nod at it. It blinks. You arrive at a door marked Heraldry and Final Results. You take a breath. One more phase. You push the door open, and a man in a feathered hat shouts, Thy results shall now be declared in song. Oh no. The man in the feathered hat strikes a pose that's somewhere between opera singer and escaped mime. Behind him stands a brass gong the size of a modest horse, and beside that, of course, is a town crier warming up by gargling something that sounds suspiciously like pickled onions. Welcome, the feathered man bellows, to the Hall of Declarations, where destiny is sung, shouted, and occasionally mimed when appropriate. You blink slowly. He claps his hands. 2 assistants in matching tights drag forward a scroll longer than your last 5 life choices. Today's list includes 3 kitchen boys, 1 novice falconer, 2 spiritual scapegoats, and yes, our dear apprentice. Questionable. You are, it seems, the headliner. The crier steps up. He's a lanky fellow with lungs like bellows and the expression of someone who was born yelling. He unrolls a scroll of his own, clears his throat, and bellows, Hear ye, hear ye! Let all who aren't currently being stung by wasps draw near. A pause. No wasps, good. The announcement continues. Be it known to all in the castle, the bailey, the shire, and the nearby sheep. This apprentice, questionable of foot, but mighty of mouth, has passed 9 trials of varied ridiculousness. Applause? No, just one confused cough. The feathered man begins a gentle chant, joined by 2 monks harmonizing in dissonant thirds. He came with naught but hope and spleen. He swam a moat that smelled unclean. He bowed too low but spilled no beans. We give him thus employment dreams. Someone plays a triangle. The proclamation builds. It details your pudding bravery, your theological metaphors, your duel with the butter-armed woman, and of course, the infamous stew feather kiss. You close your eyes and wonder what your ancestors would think. Probably, what's a triangle? Then the song ends. A pause. A moment of silence. This end. By virtue of parchment, persistence, and potato-based piety, you are hereby conditionally hired. You blink. Conditionally? The herald unrolls a much smaller scroll. Pending completion of final oaths, you shall begin employment in the house of Mulchgrave as junior assistant sub-steward to the minor keeper of seasonal footwear. There's a tiny cheer from the back. It might be a sneeze. You nod slowly. That sounds manageable. The steward approaches with the paperwork. You'll report to the cobbler's wing next to the chapel of Itchy Saints. You raise an eyebrow. Long story, well, you know what Wama says. You sign a ledger using a quill that leaks ink and judgment. A scribe stamps your name beside a small, squinting boot. The crier hands you a scroll labeled Duties, Warnings, and Encouraged Behaviors. It reads, Never question left boots. Tuesday is for laces only. If the archbishop asks about sandals, change the subject. Speak softly near polished leather. Shine with humility, not vinegar. You are then invited, nay commanded, to perform a ceremonial lap of the courtyard, holding aloft your parchment while being followed by a tambourine player and an unusually large pigeon. You try to look humble. The pigeon is not helping. Historians still argue whether this kind of announcement was traditional or just one castle's attempt to cope with boredom. Some manuscripts hint at celebratory shouts and festive clanging, while others claim conditional hires were announced by dropping a turnip from a window. Either way, you're now publicly employed. Sort of. You're returned to the entry hall, where a basket of ceremonial shoes sits beneath a painted saint who looks mildly disapproving. You are instructed to select your work slipper. There are options: a boot with one jingle bell, a felted sock embroidered with "Try Again," a left clog made entirely of bread, or a mismatched pair with Latin phrases carved into the soles. You choose the mismatched ones. They say semper dubita and numquam plaud. Roughly always doubt, never clap. Seems appropriate. You're handed your final parchment. It reads, Let this document serve as notice that the bearer, though frequently bewildered and moderately possessed of blisters, is hereby permitted to serve in this house with all privileges, responsibilities, and vague symbolic duties therein. May their spoons be many, and their turnips be few. You almost cry. Almost. But then a boy in a too large tunic runs up holding a goat on a leash. For you, he says. You want to know why? House mascot, he shrugs. You're responsible now. The goat snorts. You stare. He blinks. You sigh. And lead your new co-worker, Sir Hornsworth, into your future. You and Sir Hornsworth, who walks like he owns the place, and possibly does, are led down a hallway labeled Lesser Steward's Annex, seasonal. The walls are decorated with fading frescoes of shoes from centuries past, each with a tiny plaque beneath. Blessed sandals of St. Norbert, the pilgrim's slipper, the boot that bit back. One pair is behind glass and bears scorch marks. You decide not to ask. At the end of the hall, you reach your new post. A low-ceilinged chamber with racks of muddy footwear, a bubbling pot of wax, and a very tired-looking man hunched over a stool, brushing what appears to be ash off a velvet slipper. He looks up. Ah, he says, the new one. You nod. Junior assistant sub-steward to the minor keeper of seasonal footwear. He winces. Oof, they gave you the full title? You glance around. Is this the whole department? Until Martin comes back from exile, yes. You blink. What happened to Martin? He confused Lent shoes with Advent sandals. Oh, tragic. You're shown to your station. A small shelf, a polishing cloth, a candle stub, and a wooden sign that reads, Hope lives here, but not for long. You set down your goat. Sir Hornsworth begins eating the sign. Your supervisor, his name is Hubert, but everyone calls him the Soulman, gives you your first task: resorting the ceremonial insoles by saint, feast day, and toe orientation. There are over 200 of them, most wrapped in linen, a few weeping gently from years of foot-based trauma. One is embroidered with a quote in Latin that roughly translates to, "If thine toes offend thee, cover them with wool." You get to work. Hours pass. Your hands are cramping, your candle flickers. Sir Hornsworth is snoring softly beside a pile of fur-lined galoshes. Just when you think you've found a rhythm, the soulman slaps a scroll beside you. "Emergency request," he says. "Who's requesting?" "The Duchess." You freeze. Her ladyship requires her spring processional boots to be retrieved, inspected, and re-anointed by sundown. You check the clock. It is already past sundown. He shrugs. "Guess you'd better be fast." He hands you a key, a map of the castle's lower vaults, and a potato. "What's the potato for?" He squints. "Possibly symbolic, possibly dinner." You take it anyway. Down you go, into the vaults, which are predictably damp and smell faintly of despair and turnip rot. You pass several crypts, a pigeon whispering Latin, and a sleeping guard who's using a helmet as a pillow. You find the boot chest. It's enormous and locked. Your key doesn't work. The chest stares at you with quiet superiority. You fish around and discover another key, hidden in a boot's toe, of course, and unlock the chest. Inside are 4 pairs of dazzling footwear. Velvet, gilt-stitched, slightly moth-nibbled, but glorious. You grab the spring processional pair, green, gold laces, bells at the ankles, and race back up the stairs. Sir Hornsworth greets you by headbutting your knee. The soulman nods in approval. "Quick enough. We may avoid another slipper incident." "Another?" He doesn't elaborate. You prepare the boots, dust them, anoint them with rose oil, brush out the laces, and, per custom, whisper a short benediction to Saint Crispin, patron of cobblers and miraculous foot alignment. Hubert checks your work. "Not bad. Your polishing technique's a little enthusiastic." "Enthusiastic? Like you're trying to rub out sin." You shrug. "Aren't we all?" He sighs. "Fine. Deliver them to the Duchess's antechamber. Use the east corridor. Avoid the parrot. You do as told." The east corridor is lined with red carpet, gold sconces, and an angry bird in a small cage. The parrot squawks, "Blasphemer, cabbage toe." You walk faster. You reach the Duchess's chambers. A lady in waiting takes the boots and gives you a single nod. "Acceptable." You return triumphant. Sort of. Back in the annex, Hubert sits beside a pile of wooden sandals. "How are you finding the position?" "Tea damp." "Good. That means you're paying attention." Sir Hornsworth headbutts a clump of fur boots and starts chewing. You settle back into your rhythm, folding felt inserts, filing toe tokens, and separating feast day buckles from fast day clasps. Every so often, a scribe pops in, requesting emergency repairs on something absurd: a bishop's riding clog, a pageant mule, a relic slipper blessed by a mildly drunk hermit. You handle it all, one boot at a time. Historians still argue whether such positions existed in this level of detail, or if it's just what happens when monasteries were bored. But medieval records do mention keepers of vestments, girdle wardens, and even a holy sock custodian in a Bavarian priory. Someone had to care for the shoes. You somehow are now that someone. By the end of the day, your hands ache, your knees pop, and your brain is composed almost entirely of shoe sizes and goat grunts. But your parchment now carries the final wax seal, a stylized foot inside a sunburst. You are official. Hubert pats your shoulder. You did well. Thanks. He nods. You'll want to get some rest. Tomorrow's cloak cleaning Wednesday. Is that relevant to shoes? No, he says, but they always blame us anyway. You take Sir Hornsworth by the lead and walk slowly to your new quarters. A tiny stone room next to the laundry pit with a straw mat, a fire brick, and a painted tile of St. Schubert the Enduring. You collapse onto the mat. The goat curls up beside you. You are for the first time in days horizontal and employed. Sort of. Morning arrives not with sunshine, but with a rooster screaming in Middle English and a goose slapping the door. You open one eye. Sir Hornsworth is chewing your sleeve. Again. He snorts, possibly with affection, or possibly to remind you that Cloak Cleaning Wednesday waits for no apprentice. You sit up. Every part of your body creaks. The straw mat has lodged itself permanently into your back. You stretch, crack something important, and shuffle into your uniform. Yesterday's robe, now slightly more resigned. Outside, the castle hums with activity. A squire drops a lance. A nun argues with a cook over the theology of lentils. Someone's setting fire to a small cart labeled experimental parchment. The air smells like onions, sweat, and distant mildew. You make your way to the laundry cloister, a building once holy, now sacred only to soap. Hubert's already there, sleeves rolled, overseeing a pile of cloaks large enough to smother a small rebellion. Mornin', he says. You're early. Am I? No, but you look surprised. He hands you a brush, a bucket, and a cloak that smells like wet dog and burnt incense. This one belonged to the choir master. Be gentle. It bites. You begin scrubbing. Cloak after cloak. Some with embroidery, some with bloodstains. One with a pocket full of raisins and an angry wasp. You soldier on. Why are we doing cloaks, you finally ask. Hubert shrugs. Tradition. They blame the shoe department when things go missing. Easier to preemptively clean everything. It doesn't make sense, but very little does in this castle. At mid-morning, you're called away. A boy in 2 short breeches tugs your sleeve. You've been summoned by the Lady Matilda. You blink. Who? She's the noble's niece, wants help with something. You follow him to the tower stairs, spiraling upward through dust and tapestries of saints looking mildly disapproving. Lady Matilda turns out to be 12, covered in ink and surrounded by scrolls. I heard you're clever, she says, pointing to a stool. That's a strong rumor. She points to a massive scroll. I need help decoding this. It's Uncle's will. I want to make sure he's not leaving the estate to the pig. You glance at the Latin. It's ornate, looped, and deeply annoyed with punctuation. You read aloud. Cornace creward. And should the noble house find itself without direct heir of the male persuasion, then shall it pass, in token of divine providence, to the next best candidate of loyal temperament and squishable nose. Lady Matilda frowns. That does sound like Piglet. She throws her quill. You help her retranslate half the document before her tutor arrives and scolds you both for breathing near noble ink. You are dismissed. But Matilda sneaks you a plum and says, you're all right. You take it as a compliment, possibly a reference. As you return to the laundry, you're intercepted by yet another steward. New assignment, he says. I was polishing choir stains. Now you're delivering shoes to the Exorcists Guild. They have a guild? He hands you a satchel of sandals. Holy footwear. They're stored in the chapel crypt. Just don't make eye contact with anything in jars. Down you go again. The crypt is cool and smells like candle smoke, time and unresolved guilt. A robed man meets you at the door. Blessing, he whispers. Likewise, he takes the sandals, sniffs them, and murmurs a blessing in what might be Welsh. One pair is returned. Too haunted, he says. Send it back to the cobbler. You don't ask. Historians still argue whether holy footwear was genuinely thought to retain spiritual energy or if it was just a very elaborate marketing scheme by 13th century cobblers. There's record of sandals blessed by saints being used in minor exorcisms, major coronations, and once to silence a rooster possessed by hubris. You deliver the haunted pair back to Hubert, who places them in a locked cupboard labeled, "Do not anoint without permission." You're about to return to cloak duty when you're summoned again. This time, the minstrel court. Why? They've heard about your feather kiss incident. Apparently, they want to reenact it in song. You are, unfortunately, asked to provide emotional context. You try. I was hungry and scared, and the stew smelled like courage. They nod sagely. One begins tuning a lute. Before you leave, you catch sight of the lyrics being drafted. He kissed the feather with pudding pride. The nobles gasp, but none denied that in his heart, though sorely tested, a servant true had been invested. You pretend not to tear up. You return to the annex. Hubert raises an eyebrow. Busy morning? I helped decode a will, handled haunted sandals, and may have inspired a ballad. He nods. Standard Wednesday. He hands you a loaf of bread. Eat. You do. It's hard, but it tastes like progress. As the sun lowers, you help finish the last round of cloak brushing, then sweep the annex floor with a broom made of what feels like leftover confessionals. Sir Hornsworth bleats, licks your elbow, and knocks over a bucket of soap. You leave it. Some things are better left to the morning. On your way to your quarters, you pass the steward. He gives you a small nod. You're settling in, he says. You've survived the feast, the moat, the pudding, the goat, and the parrot. You smile weakly. Keep this up, he says, and you might get promoted to full steward's assistant. Your breath catches. Really? He nods. But first, survive tomorrow. Why? He grins. Tomorrow's the goose census. Oh no. You wake before dawn to the sound of distant honking. Not gentle honking. Not the pleasant pastoral kind that says, morning is here, embrace the day. No, this is aggressive, sustained honking. The kind that suggests someone is trying to win an argument using only volume and feathers. Sir Hornsworth stands in your doorway, staring at you like, I warned you. Today is the goose census. You rise, you stretch, you pray a little. Not to any particular saint, just to the general category of beings responsible for mercy, footwear, and avian diplomacy. At breakfast, you are handed a scroll, a quill, and a small pouch of oats. Use the oats wisely, the steward says. You glance at the scroll. It's titled Abridged Ledger of Hunkable Property, Section 6, North Courtyard Geese, Annual Enumeration. There are columns for description, behavior, weight, approximate, and general vibe. You laugh. No one else does. The census, you're told, is a tradition going back generations, initiated after the Great Goose Incident of 1142, when the entire eastern flock went rogue and occupied a granary. Since then, every goose has been counted, categorized, and, if necessary, interrogated. You're paired with a monk named Cedric, who walks with a limp, carries a staff, and mutters, honkers beget honkers under his breath like a mantra. You enter the north courtyard. There are so many geese, dozens, maybe hundreds, white, gray, fluffy, sleek. Some sleeping, some glaring, one balancing on a barrel like it's planning something sinister. Cedric hands you a stick with a feather tied to the end. Wave this, he says. It's how we signal neutrality. You try it. The geese stare. First up is a one-footed gander with an eye patch and a scar across his beak. Cedric reads from his old ledger. Sir Balthazar, 3 years of service, known to chase squires, once bit a bishop. You note, still intimidating, avoid rear approach. Next is a young goose with unusually fluffy down. She honks melodically. Lady Flufferton, Cedric mutters, recently canonized by the cook's assistant. You pause. Canonized? In the kitchen. For bravery in resisting stew. You write heroic tendencies, may seek sainthood, likes corn. An hour passes. You document 27 geese. Some are compliant. Others require bribery. One insists on biting your boot repeatedly. Cedric pulls you aside. If we make it through the day without losing a finger, we'll have done better than last year. You ask what happened last year. He holds up 2 fingers. These are the ones I kept. You nod slowly. Next on the list is a notorious specimen, Gustav the Grudgeful. You spot him immediately, larger than the rest, missing 2 tail feathers with the slow swagger of a goose whose one fights and doesn't need to explain himself. He approaches. You try the oat bribe. He stares. You wave the feather stick. He bites it in half. Cedric whispers, don't make eye contact. You do. Mistake. Gustav charges. You run. Around the barrel, past the well, through the arms of a very startled scribe. Gustav gives chase like a feathery nightmare with vendetta wings. You dive behind a hay cart. He honks once, then waddles off like, that's right. Cedric finds you and helps you up. Did I pass the census? You wheeze. You passed something, he says. We'll call it adaptive evasion. Back to work. By noon, your parchment is splattered, torn, and suspiciously damp. You've documented 64 geese, each with unique attitudes. Indifferent, vengeful, existential, and possibly French. One had a monocle, you didn't question it. As you reach the final row of nests, you hear shouting. A steward runs up. Emergency in the kitchens. They need a footwear assistant. Why? Someone mistook the Duchess's ceremonial slippers for bread. They've been baked. You leave Cedric with the geese and sprint toward the kitchen. Inside, chaos. The Duchess's shoes sit cooling on a rack, buttery and golden. They smell incredible. The cook is in tears. I thought they were pastries. Who embroiders crust colors? You sigh, examine the shoes, and carefully begin brushing off the excess poppy seeds. You have one idea, rebrand. You take the decorative parsley and reposition it as seasonal accent. You dust the shoes with flour like it was intentional. You present them to the steward with a straight face. Behold, you say, the Duchess's spring crustal slippers. A fashionable homage to fertility, bread, and the fragility of footwear. He stares. Oh, you might be a genius, he whispers. Later that day, word spreads. The Duchess loves them. The castle whispers of the new steward with a flair for edible fashion. You are summoned to the nobleman's study. He eyes you. I've heard you've calmed the geese, charmed the cook, and saved a ceremonial wardrobe from complete pastry annihilation. You nod cautiously. Tell me, he asks, how would you like to move up? You blink. Up where? To assistant to the High Steward of Odd Occurrences. There is a long silence. You finally ask, what exactly does that job involve? He leans forward. Mostly goats, misfiled relics, haunted laundry, and whatever the parrot dreams about. You think of the moat, the pudding, the feather, the goat, the stew, and you nod. I accept. Historians still argue whether positions like assistant to the High Steward of Odd Occurrences truly existed or were just catch-alls for people too weird to fire. But it's clear medieval life needed flexible thinkers, nimble feet, and people not easily startled by poultry. You return to your quarters that night to find Sir Hornsworth perched on your bed, wearing what appears to be your ceremonial sock like a hat. He bleats. You bleat back. You've come a long way. From questionable to possibly useful. By the following morning, your promotion becomes official. The High Steward of Odd Occurrences greets you outside his chamber with a sleepy grin and a ledger that appears to be written entirely in code, or possibly the dreams of a tired cat. His name is Lord Egbert of Brambley, though most simply call him that one with the bells. You soon discover why. He wears 3 small brass bells on his left sleeve, which he jingles when thinking, sneezing, or issuing minor threats. Come in, he says, waving you through a curtain made of old monk habits. His office looks like someone tried to organize a library inside a hayloft during a thunderstorm. Scrolls spill from every surface. Boots hang from the ceiling. There's a jar labeled emergency toast crumbs, blessed, and a pigeon asleep in an inkwell. First order of business, Egbert announces, an investigation. You nod, fully committing to whatever madness lies ahead. We've received word, he says gravely, that someone has been stealing relics from the chapel and replacing them with carrots. You blink. Holy carrots? Not yet. You're handed a lantern, a ledger, and a fork for uncovering secrets, and sent off to the chapel of Saint Venerable Gert, patron of mild forgetfulness. There you find 3 empty reliquary cases. One now contains a suspiciously clean carrot, a note that reads, "The finger needed a rest." A faint sense of guilt in the air. You take notes. As you're leaving, you run into the friar who once tried to exorcise you. He's chasing a ferret with a cross. Any luck, you ask? He sighs. The ferret claims to be the ghost of a relic thief. I don't have a liturgy for that. You offer your fork. He blesses it. You feel empowered. Back at Egbert's office, you report the relic theft turned produce swap. Classic, he mutters. Mark it down as devotional produce incident number 47. You ask about the others. He waves vaguely. Most involved turnips. One involved a melon with heretical leanings. Your next task is far more delicate, organizing the noble napping schedule. Apparently, the lords and ladies of the court adhere to a strict rotation of afternoon naps, with precise rules. Never nap beneath a tapestry depicting betrayal. No more than 2 earls in the same nap zone. Wake no one who dreams of falcons. You find the nap scroll. It's 23 feet long, written in both ink and what might be plum jam, and begin the laborious process of updating names, shifting pillow assignments, and issuing silence tokens to those with particularly loud sandals. Sir Hornsworth, meanwhile, decides that now is the time to sleep directly on your feet. You let him. Halfway through, a squire rushes in shouting, "The parrot's at it again!" You and Egbert exchange a look. You grab your emergency out pouch. The parrot, you discover, has escaped its cage, constructed a tiny crown from breadcrumbs, and is now perched on the Duchess's headboard, declaring, "I am the truth. Bow, peasants." You try reason. It hurls a walnut. You offer oats. It accepts but insists on being sung to first. You clear your throat and hum the feather-kissing ballad from the feast. The parrot calms, lands on your shoulder, mutters, "Acceptable." You've gained an ally and possibly a liability. Later that evening, you're assigned to oversee the inventory of potentially cursed objects. This includes a spoon that sings when wet, a velvet slipper that tries to crawl away at dusk, a wig with an attitude, an urn labeled definitely just ashes, don't worry. You carefully catalog them all, affixing tags such as mildly haunted, annoyingly cursed, and extremely opinionated. Historians still argue whether medieval households actually maintained lists of cursed items or whether this was just a practical way to avoid being blamed when things caught fire or made unsettling noises in the pantry. Either way, it's oddly comforting to know the slipper isn't just you. The following day, Egbert claps you on the shoulder. Final test, he says. A test of loyalty, endurance, and selective deafness. You blink. Go on. You're to deliver this scroll to the Lord of Outer Hayfield. You nod. He lives atop the West Tower. All right. And believes himself to be a turnip. There's a pause. Do I address him as such? Only if you value your ankles. You ascend the tower, passing 6 different heraldic goats, 2 maidens doing synchronized embroidery, and a knight arguing with his own helmet. At the top, you find the Lord of Outer Hayfield seated on a barrel, wearing a leafy crown and humming what you think might be Greensleeves in a minor key. Sir, you begin bowing. Turnip, he corrects. Apologies, Turnip. You hand him the scroll. He opens it, sniffs it, and declares, "The ink lacks conviction." You nod as one does. "I shall consider its proposals," he says solemnly, then begins gently headbutting the scroll as if rooting in soil. Mission complete. You descend the tower, physically intact and only mildly confused. Back in Egbert's office, he hands you your final seal, a small wax turnip stamped with the phrase, "He returned with sanity mostly intact." "You've done well," he says. You smile. "Welcome," he adds, "into the team." Sir Hornsworth bleats. The pigeon coos. The bells on Egbert's sleeve jingle. And in that moment, surrounded by scrolls, spoons, and parrot feathers, you realize you've truly arrived. Your medieval job interview has finally ended, and somehow you survived. It's been 3 weeks since you first stood, trembling and slightly damp, outside the castle gates with a creased parchment and a dream. Now you stand again, taller, a little less damp, and wearing 2 matching shoes no less, just inside those very gates, watching a new group of hopefuls shuffle in. They look exactly like you did, uncertain, wide-eyed, and already regretting their breakfast. You nod at one of them, who's attempting to read his own name tag upside down. He nods back and promptly walks into a goose. You sigh, that one might not make it. The steward joins you at your side. "They'll do fine," he says, even though he sounds unconvinced. "I kissed a feather once," you say quietly. He laughs. "Didn't we all? Your duties have changed. No longer are you brushing choir cloaks or polishing haunted sandals. As assistant to the High Steward of Odd Occurrences, your work involves the strange, the cursed, and the possibly metaphorical. This week alone, you've sorted 3 jars of suspicious fog, officiated a debate between 2 monks about whether a cheese had divine intent, and rewritten the castle anthem in goose-friendly hexameter. You've also kept track of the Lord of Outer Hayfield's seasonal molting schedule. He still believes he's a turnip, and helped organize the Feast of Slightly Burnt Things, a beloved annual event featuring offerings of overcooked bread, overly ambitious pudding, and a ceremonial torching of last year's laundry list. Today's assignment, escorting the parrot, now wearing a tiny tabard that reads Truth, to the weekly Council of Forgotten Problems. It's mostly people arguing about whether it's acceptable to keep relics in boots. You'll take minutes. The parrot will heckle. You pass Sir Hornsworth on your way to the chamber. He's lounging on a velvet pillow, chewing absent-mindedly on the bishop's spare mitre. He sees you and snorts, a sign of approval. You think back on the journey, the trials, the pudding, the feather, the haunted slipper, the sudden, unspoken understanding that the only way to survive medieval employment is with equal parts sincerity and complete surrender to nonsense. Historians still argue whether jobs in this era were ever truly earned or just endured, whether survival was merit or miracle, whether candidates were chosen for their lineage or because they didn't flinch when handed a frog wearing a crown. You now believe it's all true. All of it. You've lived it. You step into the chamber, take your seat beside a man who insists he's the reincarnation of Saint Taubert, and open your parchment. The parrot coughs. "Begin," it squawks. And you do. You are now part of the castle's living machinery, a cog in the grand, grinding wheel of old laws and new potatoes. You've made peace with chaos. You've forged friendships with friars, goats, and inanimate footwear. And you've done the one thing no one thought possible. You survived a medieval job interview. The castle quiets around you. The torches burn low, their flames dancing softly against the stones. Somewhere in the distance, a lute plays a minor chord. The pigeons have finally stopped arguing. Even the goose appears to be asleep. One eye open, of course, just in case. You ease down onto your straw mat, now twice as comfortable thanks to a pillow stuffed with old prayer receipts and hay that's only slightly itchy. The ceiling above you glows with the faint warmth of candlelight and chalk drawings, little scribbles left by apprentices before you. Stars, moons, doodles of boots, a saint doing what might be cartwheels. The room smells of lavender, parchment, and faintly toasted bread. Someone's baking again. Outside, the wind rustles the banners. The owl in the north tower hoots once, then curls back into sleep. The goat murmurs in its stall. You're safe. You're warm. You're oddly proud of how much you've learned about ceremonial slippers. The castle has accepted you, not with fanfare, but with a nod, a worn blanket, a job that mostly makes sense if you squint. You've earned your place, so now let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift backward across scrolls and sparrows, pudding bowls and parrot debates. Let them settle like dust in a quiet chapel, soft, slow, sacred in their absurdity. You've done enough. You've walked the halls, kissed the feather, cataloged the odd. And now in this strange, warm, impossible place, you can rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.